Ladies and gentlemen, welcome here at ITU and welcome online, our audience out there. We have today a very exciting program because we mix two formats which we have been developing. On the one hand, our first lecture of Professor Sebastian Dennerlein, as well as our spotlight on project-based learning, on the type of learning which we want to do at ITU and which we will provide to our students already now in the PhD program, but especially in the new master's program, which will start this fall. And with this, let me shortly introduce Sebastian. Sebastian did his master's in psychology from the University of Graz. Then he changed to the No Center and there did his PhD also in psychology. And then for his postdoc, his first postdoc he did at TU Graz, specifically in the area of digital TU Graz marketplace. This was a format where he tried to entice a lot of different people at TU Graz to use different kinds of learning technologies and to explore different venues there. From there, he went out into the world, specifically into Twente, the Netherlands, and there worked with the Professional Learning and Technology Group there. And and then he's back in Austria at ITU, and I welcome him very warmly as assistant professor here.
Thanks, Stephanie. Interprofessional transformations, why process matters. So who am I? Stephanie said it, a cognitive psychologist with a background in experimental and lab studies. Where do I make my my impact? At the workplace, where professionals learn individually and collaboratively. What am I doing in my research? I'm aiming at understanding and supporting interprofessional transformations by co-evolving learning theories and technologies and developing methods to co-design both. And what I'm doing here at ITU, I'm trying to understand learning processes and because of you. And why this is the case, that's what I want to disclose as part of this talk. So let's start off with what is working and what is learning. So I need your engagement now. So please, when I ask for each of the pictures that will follow, whether that is working and you think this is the case, then please raise your hand. And when I then afterwards ask, if it's learning and you think it's rather learning, then please raise your hand at that point, okay? So, do you think this is working? Who thinks this is learning? Okay, let's see. Do you think this is working? Who thinks this is learning? Well, that's quite equal. Let's see how it continues. Is this working? Or is this learning? There are some who trick. Is this working? Less? Okay, okay. Is this learning? Is this working? Yeah. Is this learning? A few. Is this working? Yeah, this is working, right? Oh, I skip it now because, so thanks for your engagement and thanks for reflecting about the differentiation. But I'm sorry to say, working is equal to learning, right? So the people who raised their hand all the time were on the right side. What kind of learning? That is the question that we should ask ourselves. And the answer lies, or not exclusively, but at least it helps to think about some dimensions, such as the interwoveness. So is the learning detached from the workplace, from the working context, from the working processes, or is it very much interwoven with it? The formality, is the learning pre-structured, predefined? Is it pre-designed by someone else, uniquely made for learning, such as at a training institute or something, then it's formal. And if it's just happening day to day, whilst you do your job, then it's informal. And the directedness. Does your supervisor, your mentor, your boss tell you what, when, and how to learn? Externally directed. Or are you the person on the steering wheel self-responsibly driving it? Then it's self-directed. And there is also undirected learning, which is happening more unconsciously. So when we talk about work-related learning, then this includes learning that is more formal, taking place outside of the workplace, and being more externally directed, such as at a conference. So here there was a bit clearer the hands raised to learning out of that reason, I guess, because a conference is a place that is made for knowledge exchange. The program is made by a committee, and the speaker, like I now, determine what you will hear in the next 25 minutes. So it's externally directed in that way. But if we look at workplace learning, then it describes more learning that is interwoven with the workplace. So in the context of work, that is more informal and often so more self-directed, such as during meetings, or when you do your job just on your desk, or when you work very hands-on. So it's important when you think about workplace learning that you think about what activities are actually the people doing daily during their job. So they discuss ideas maybe, they consult information sources. Here, it may get a bit more formal, because when you then watch an educational video on YouTube, then you're more in the context of work on the more formal side. You can engage in trial and error by just coding, running into errors, debugging, and just trying it again. You can also provide feedback, teaching to learn. You can just observe an expert, carefully monitoring what this person is doing and why this person is doing that, or you can just collaborate with colleagues. And all of that and much more is learning at the workplace. So I hope we have a shared understanding now what workplace learning is. And I would like to give you an idea of what I did in technology-enhanced learning in the healthcare domain. So when a medical doctor is talking to a patient, then she's also learning. Or when a nurse is talking to a colleague on the hallway, then this is also learning. And what they do is they face valuable experiences. They have a really time-pressured day, so they have a hasty day. They run from one thing, from one client to the next, and they patient to the next. And during that, they may, at the end of the day, already have forgotten what valuable experiences they actually faced. So it's a challenge for them to keep up with all the experiences and trace them in some way, because they are obliged to evidence their informal learning at the end of the year. But even these notes get lost in cluttered email addresses or email address. I guess everyone knows that at some point. You lose the overview and the search doesn't work anymore. So what we did is we built a tool which helps to recall these experiences based on time-based cues and on semantic cues, and then allow the professionals to collect a subset of these experiences, to relate them to each other, to categorize them, and in this way, gain an understanding and conclude on their experiences, so making sense of their experiences. And what we did is, whilst we developed that tool, we also developed a model for making sense in experiential learning. What are the methods that can help us to arrive there? So I guess who's a software developer might already have faced this situation, and actually, it's a bit of a different picture, but with the help of my colleagues, I made it PC, politically correct. So, but the idea is clear. As a developer, you often so have a good intention. You have an idea of how your software should be used, and then it's used in totally different ways. And okay, that person seems a bit offended or attacking the cup. But in the end, these are the actual learning opportunities where something goes wrong, not according to what you have expected. And this is a chance to learn because you might have forgotten about a need that your user is actually facing. So this does not only work when you have a final software, but it can be a conceptual prototype or a paper prototype. And these designs can provide action possibilities, such as recalling an experience or making sense of experiences. And it's getting interesting when you analyze how these action possibilities that you provide, how they are used. Are they used in expected ways according to your intentions, or in other ways that you wouldn't have foreseen at that point. And these are chances to learn. If you design and analyze these affordances, part of each cycle of software development and extract design theory and domain insights, aggregate evidence for the relation of these insights, and finally conclude on models such as the one that I showed to you, sense making and experiential learning. And now I would like to continue and tell you a bit why I'm so interested in processes. So society is facing several grand challenges at the moment, you know it: energy transition, digital transformation, and many more. And what these challenges have in common, they require us to collaborate across disciplines, across professions, across organizational boundaries. So they require us to be interprofessional and collaborate in that way. And they also share that they result in innovations that do not only change the way we are living, but also the way that we are working. By 2027, for example, it's expected that 23% of the current jobs are changing. And it's expected that 70 million new jobs are created through AI. So these societal transformations, they result in a need for up and reskilling and for reinventing our professional practices. And what is the way to address these needs? By engaging in professional learning and development. Either individually or in interprofessional teams. And what do I mean now when I talk about these transformations? I'm including in these transformations human transformations, so professional learning and development. And societal transformation therefore lead to learning outcomes, trusted teams that can produce innovations like algorithms, and then also clearly learning processes when these teams, when the persons that are part of these teams learn individually or in interprofessional teams. So these learning outcomes can only be understood in the light of the learning processes. And therefore, you can only understand a transformation if you look at how professionals and teams of professionals are transforming themselves. And that's why there is a need for looking into the processes and why processes matter. I'm studying this interprofessional transforming. And to do so, I'm drawing upon the research perspectives of technology-enhanced learning and methods for designing educational technologies. But what do these teams actually look like and what challenges do they face? So this is, for example, from a project, Chasarop Hit the Gas. And it's about learning communities that are built between different organizations. So they send members to these learning communities because they share challenges that they need to tackle in the energy transition, such as installing more effective heat pumps, so increasing the efficacy of them. And these teams then meet over 10 times, and in this time frame, they should then finally tackle that challenge altogether. And there are on board ICT workers, engineers, mechanics, modelers, facilitators, and roughly around 10 persons that participate in these teams. However, these teams often so fail in the process. So they do not always live up to the expectations that have been put into them. So they face language or knowledge barriers or epistemologic barriers of how to approach a problem, or they get stuck in a certain process phase. They maybe brainstorm too long or share too long ideas. And then this might be the reason because they didn't reflect on their team learning process enough. So what we need is actually a process-oriented understanding of how such transformations on professional level take place. And to answer questions like when, at which time are they facing which challenges? So we need to understand when this happens. We need to understand how action and reflection on the go helps them to overcome these challenges. We need to understand the drivers of that, on the conditions under which the challenges occur and under which effective activities occur that help them to overcome them. So we need to recognize and make visible how learners overcome and confront these challenges individually and in teams. And there we face a problem because there is a mismatch with traditional methodologies with this emergent nature and of moment-to-moment changes. So to study these processes, we need to prevent some pitfalls. such as, for example, just using cross-sectional study designs, one measurement point, and then concluding from one measurement point onto processes, which happens quite often. And a second thing that we need to prevent is to not just conclude from the group level to the individual level. There is a quite good example from Fischer or Hammaker, who said that when you look on the group level on the proficiency of writers, then the more proficient a writer is, or writers are, the faster they type, the less errors they make on the group level. I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you look on the individual level, then the correlation just turns completely around. Why? Because each level, irrespective of how good you are, you will make more errors if you type faster. But on the group level, it looks differently. So that is an ecological fallacy and just a danger of just generalizing from the group to the individual level. So we need to mind the individual level and come up with within subjects designs which have more than just 1-2 measurement points to actually understand these processes. So what I would like to do now is to give you 2 examples of how I apply that process perspective in my research. Once on the individual professional learning and development side with experience sampling, and once on the collaborative side with process mining and network analysis. And I will start off with that research that I do together with my PhD student, Amber Cornett. And there are plenty of models out there which explain that interprofessional learning, like the cross-boundary teaming model by Edmondson. It has actually some years on its back already, and it's very helpful. So don't get me wrong, these are enormous seminal papers that help to understand what is happening and what factors play a role, what contextual factors play a role, which emergent states are built, what team member interactions are relevant at all. But what is actually happening in detail? How are these activities unfolding over time? Because that is the understanding that we need when we want to support these teams, right? So there are a lot of questions. I just want to pick out 2, like how does team learning and reflexivity interact? And what is the role of the facilitator? So when doing my research, I'm not only looking at 1 team, but for example, at 8 teams. I'm not only looking at 1 meeting, but 10 meetings. These meetings are 3D camera recorded and segmented into different team development phases. From that, we took 100 hours of audio, transcribed that, and you can imagine that this is a wall of text. We coded that text for team activities and dialogues, and now we have the basis to do quantitative analytics on top. So first, team learning activities help to co-construct knowledge. Idea generation, discussing results, I think it's quite clear in blue. In green, team reflexivity activities, planning, monitoring, and evaluating the learning process together as a team. And this is how it looks like. Blue, again, team learning activities. Green, the team reflexivity activities. And you see that there is a majority of these, of the 10 different meetings. So there's much more team learning going on. And it gets interesting now if you segment this data into the 3 different phases and then see during forming, functioning, and finishing, it's 1/4 to 1/5 of team reflexivity activities that play a role. And that already gives an indication, like here's a lot of collaborative idea generation and planning. Here is some discussing results coming in the middle phase. And here in the end, you also have then boundary crossing. So you can get an understanding of what is relevant in which phase. But what you miss is actually what these teams are doing. So you can't just say what is important, but you cannot understand what they actually do. And that is where we drew upon process mining, in particular the fuzzy miner algorithm, to just understand what are recurring prominent patterns in the data and distill them or create models out of that. And what we learned is that in the first phase, planning and collaborative idea generation are quite important. Why? Because the teams need to arrive at a shared goal before they go into the next phase. In the next phase, they then need to search solution approaches for the wicked problem. So they need to test and trial different solution approaches. So discussing results becomes part of that pattern. And in the end, that's, I guess you know that feeling being part of a team, but the time is ticking and you see time is running out, you need to deliver. That's actually when the last phase is then dropping in. And that phase gets in our data also more confused, because some are already thinking about implementation when they call then, where's boundary crossing? No, I'm missing it. when boundary crossing is happening, external feedback, boundary crossing, then the manager is coming in and discussing with the team, for example, how to implement, or when they need to see how they follow up the goal later on. So if you want to support these teams now with technology or with human coaches, that already gives some idea of what should happen and how that can be supported. But it's also interesting to now look at how the role of the facilitator is developing over time. And yeah, these measures are probably for my colleagues not so exciting, but applying them to my research domain is quite interesting. So you can also apply PageRank, which is from Google for website ranking, to understand the role of the facilitator. And the higher the PageRank, the more central the position of the facilitator in the team interactions. And what we figured out is that the role is diminishing over time, and that is also in line with theories where you say you should scaffold, but over time the scaffold should also be taken away if the teams are becoming self-empowered and can drive the learning process themselves. Gini, on the other hand, is a measure for income inequality in the population. And we use that to figure out whether the teams equally participate in these different team learning activities or team reflexivity activities. Here's just a slight trend visible anymore, but for discussing results, the teams get over the different team development phases more equally involved in the team learning process. And if you map that now over the whole lifespan of such a team, then this gets interesting, because then you can see patterns between these both measures, such as when Gini and PageRank is high, then you have a one-to-one relationship between the facilitator and one team member who challenges the participant, and then the participant provides some information back, namely what goals could be followed up, for example. Whilst during the functioning phase, it's then about here the Gini is low and the PageRank is low, and that could indicate that the team members are interacting with each other, challenging each other, because it's about the different solutions, discussing these solutions and deciding what solutions to take forward, and the facilitator is not as important anymore. So it was a rush through, but at least you could see that process is really important to understand in a higher resolution what is happening in a team and how you then can see what the teams are doing. But each team also has individual members. They need to self-regulate themselves as part of teams. So here we use experience sampling, and that's research that is done together with Nick Rosen, another PhD student. And here many of you might have seen that model already, a self-regulated learning model from Zimmerman, which is basically the same. I will keep it easy. Planning, monitoring, and evaluating. It's just better described. But again, it's just, when do the individuals actually set their goals? When do they update them? Which activities do they actually implement, and what do they learn from these activities? So that is the process that is not yet clear, and also which study designs can actually live up to that process or map it out so that you can understand it, and what is the evidence for this iterative process that it's actually effective. So experience sampling first is a range of methods that allows to do recurrent measures for participants' current states or behaviors. So if you think about digital diaries, then these are experience sampling, and these are part of the experience sampling methodology. And you can just imagine that short questionnaires are shot out over the day. So it's very situational and longitudinal how you can follow up on such learning processes. And what we did is we asked, what activity did you implement? What did you learn with that activity? How did it help you to progress on your goal, amongst other questions? And we collected 400 logs. And I think for many of you, that's like, yeah, very minimal, right? These are 400 questionnaires which have been collected. So if you think about that being questionnaires, then this is for social scientists quite a big ball game. And then you can see actually how a learner started at the beginning. This one said he has 30% in the beginning, and then completes different activities, and over the time comes closer to his goal. But that is not always the trajectory that is actually happening. This is where it gets interesting. Why did this person suddenly have a drawback? Why did this person suddenly from 60% come back to 30%? And what was the activity that helped this person to overcome that challenge? And if we now would have just 2 measurement points, we would have never known about that challenge and what happened there. But that is required to support these teams. So what we also do here is to look into sampling strategies to arrive at better data. So either by a notification and just say at 6 p.m., please record your experiences, all the ones that you had during the long day, or you do event-based sampling just at the moment when experience appears, you record that experience. And what we could figure out that event-based sampling led to more specific described experiences, and time-based sampling to more nonsensical ones. So it indicates that there is a higher ecological validity of the measurements if you do it closer to the experience and when it happened. But when I talk about a feasible design, then it's not just about being more valid in your measurements, but it's more important to not lose your participants on the go. If you imagine that this goes over weeks and you shoot out multiple questionnaires over the time, then it's important to give something back. And this also relates to the first example that I gave you with the healthcare professionals. So they need these experiences to be able to report it at the end. And what we did is to just tell them on Saturday, you experimented, that was the outcome, you were satisfied, and you thought your activity was a good selection, and providing them with a course of their learning and how they improved on a goal. And that actually helps to decide, was that activity that I implemented helpful or was it not helpful? Should I repeat that or should I rather change how I approach my learning process? And this is then where we also were interested to see whether this is happening. So we checked these experiences that were traced for whether they just report the experience and nothing else, whether they report a learning insight, whether they talk or let us know that they adjusted their goal, whether they adjusted the activities, so whether they regulated their learning process, or whether they transformed their learning process completely. And what we could see were both goals, that indeed the reflection depth was increasing, and that is over the iteration and evidence that iterative self-regulated learning actually also helps in the idea of leading to a deeper reflection depth if you engage in it recurrently. So I would be a bad researcher, I guess, if I would only punish my participants with reflection questions. So let's maybe turn that around, teach what you preach, and ask myself, why am I at ITU? So my ambition is to understand and support interprofessional learning. And this does not only mean that I'm studying interdisciplinary collaboration, but it means that I'm also conducting interdisciplinary collaboration, namely at the intersection of learning science and computer science, and I'm trying to bring them both together to make them partners in crime. So I think I'm, as a learning scientist, at the ideal place on Earth here at ITU, because I do not enforce this collaboration, but it's in the DNA of ITU that we should collaborate. So that's quite a thing for me. And what I want to contribute to is computational learning science. So using data science to advance learning theories and learning theories to advance intelligent technologies. And that would be part of my ambition here with my colleagues to push that. What does my research mean for ITU? So I think I've already mentioned that I'm at the right place on Earth, but it's also a wonderful study context. So hello, data. So interdisciplinary project-based learning, after I describe what I do with my professionals, then you can imagine that it also makes sense to apply here a process approach. Because student-centered learning is about the process. It's about understanding and supporting the process of the students and slipping into the role of the coach rather. So my whole program and research team will try, and that is what we want to live up to support and scale this learning process by supporting actual human tutors, but also conversational agents, for example, which support and complement the human tutors. And on the other hand, interdisciplinary working and researching, because we want to shape the future of work in academia here and try how we can do that by a working culture, by a working environment, working conditions to have a supportive but also productive working environment here. So I want to reframe my research streams: process-oriented understanding of active learning in higher education and at the workplace, technology-enhanced learning with artificial intelligence, methods for tracing learning processes, and designing responsible technology. And I didn't talk about the last point, so that is what I spared for the end. Together with Cecilia Schramm, I'm trying to understand how software developers can be supported in the process of identifying and resolving ethical issues. And I think that there is a big gap still. In 2019, we had roughly 85 documents out there which talked about ethical principles. And this list didn't get any shorter in 2023 for AI in education. And what I want to say is, I mean, there is no shortage of ethical principles, but there is a shortage of understanding of how we deal with them and how we can support developers, which is not easy. I mean, I would myself, if you try to be ethical in just any part of your life, it's not easy. You need to think about it, and you need to be supported in software development to do that in an efficient manner, but still living up to these principles due to also the AI Act. So let me give you an example what I mean and what the human in the loop is. So there's ChatGPT, but there are also ChatGPT detectors. Teachers like that a lot, but it's a dangerous thing. So when you think about natives, then the classification is still quite good, but the misclassification for non-natives is ranging from 50 to 75%. So that might, in the last 2 years, have improved a bit. But these detectors are biased against non-natives. And what could you do against it? You could improve the auditing of the test data set by just shouldn't I include maybe non-natives also in my data set to see whether it works right? Or it could also be flawed by the teacher, just using the outcome of a classification mindlessly without talking to the student and just trying to understand and see whether actually the student conducted misconduct or not. So one contribution that we already made is that we say it's important to think about the roles that are involved in the development process and the components. So when a data scientist, for example, cleans a data set, or when the teacher interprets the outcome of a system. And these socio-technical interactions, they are more fine-grained interactions where the developer needs to take decisions in the development process, or where the user needs to decide how to apply the technology that has been developed. And we just propose to reflect not only general on a technology, but reflect exactly at these interactions. So on a more fine-grained microethics perspective to see where issues emerge, to structure them, and then figure out ways of how to mitigate them. So, and in the future, I will collaborate with that wonderful group of PhD students in my program and the postdoc, Alexander, that you might already have met, and with a group of collaborators that I'm glad to work with. And in the future, one colleague is here, Scholt. Thanks, we will set up cool projects together as well. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Sebastian. So now you saw how a computational learning scientist is working, what kind of data he is accessing, and what kind of additional impact he's creating at ITU. So are there any direct questions for Sebastian here at the moment? Yes?
Yeah, thanks for the nice presentation. I have a question regarding what you present. You meant a lot of process. I wonder, how do you evaluate this process, whether some process leads to the successful outcome, and then how do you measure what is success?
That's actually the difficult thing if you study it in the field. So what we did, we had multiple more learning communities that we analyzed, but we took the learning communities that, according to the management, also resulted in an innovation at the end that was actually acceptable. So that is like the first step. But what we can do here at ITU is to really screen these projects, not just based on the final grade that was delivered, but over the go. And then understand at each point what was good performance, what was not good performance, based on, I think I stop here because my dear colleagues will tell about that. But if we then have this more fine-grained information, then we can compare how these patterns, or what are the successful patterns versus the not successful patterns. So thanks for these questions. This is, I think, where we can make a change here and really study in-house what then makes the difference. And we did this rather on a holistic level to see what are successful communities and what are communities that can be compared at all.
Yeah.
So kind of piggybacking on that, you talked about performance, and you also had these surveys, so people were evaluating their own performance. And my question is, was there sometimes just a huge gap between metacognition, so how people thought they performed, and how they actually performed?
We did not ask them about how well they perform. We really just asked them about how much they assessed their goal. And we found that people who clearly have more engagement, engage more regularly, also get a higher grade. But there can even be more fine-grained analysis also on that part. But what we did is we saw correlations between also the engagement in that overall process and the final grade. But we did not ask specifically about how they perceive themselves to perform in the final exam. So that's what we didn't ask. But that is also an opportunity to apply here.
I totally buy into this idea of looking at the process. I think that's really fascinating to look over time what happens, and a lot of like computational methods now give us the means to do that in more ways, right? In your empirical work there, I think I got the impression that you were almost looking at problem solving as a measure of success, maybe also kind of relating to your question. And I wonder, and that made me think like, what is not learning anymore? So if everything that you do is learning, and I would subscribe to that, right? Does it lose? I mean, how do you, as a learning scientist, kind of tackle the problem that everything is learning, and your subject of research kind of almost disappears in the whole of life in that sense? Because you learn whatever you do, and so can you study anything, or is that?
Yes. So that's why you need to pick problems, and they are difficult enough. So as you can see, studying interprofessional teams is already tough to get hands on these communities at all, being able to study them at all. But you then need to break it down to certain things that you're interested in. So I wanted to look into reflection and the combination with reflection with learning activities. So learning, everything is learning, but reflection is something different than when you experiment, when you discuss. So how these both constructs work together, and whether they are overlapping or whether they are disentangled, whether they are separate.
Because that kind of gets to that point of measures of success, right? Is it that they actually solve the problem, or is it that they learn something? They might fail at the problem.
And we need to,
right?
I played some measures for that, and we need to measure that much more in a multifaceted way. So the grade is not the only thing that you should take into account. The innovation, the product should be something that you take into account, but you want that everyone learns as part of the process as well. But if you do that with professionals in the field, then it's not so easy like with the medical doctors to ask them in the end, and now I give you a knowledge test, please fill that out. Yeah. They will just... So that is a difference that we also can do here. We have here the possibility to study ourselves, but also work with our students, let them be themselves study participants, but then also analyze the data that they themselves generated. And here we have the chance to go beyond only single measurements, and then to understand where actually such a interdisciplinary learning experience took effect and what helped in terms of activities on which level. So yeah, thanks a lot for the question. But the complexity is also something.
Let's move on. You can ask all these questions later on as well in the discussion. So let's switch from Sebastian's role as a researcher here at ITU to his role as the chair of our very first PhD program, which we have together with JKU and Schult, for example, on digital transformation of learning. So this is our one way to teach PhD students on those topics. And I would like now to introduce two ladies who have been extremely instrumental in setting up this project-based learning approach, which ITU is preaching, and where a lot of the research results from Sebastian will and continuously will flow into, and vice versa, by being a experimental space for all the research which is still to be coming. So first of all, Christina Nyström, our founding director for learning, and Carla Barreiros, our head of project-based learning. Thank you for being here.
Okay, let's see. Those of you who are online, you have to tell us if you can't hear me, okay? I can keep it down there. Perfect. Yeah. Just some technical, you know, we're a technical university, so we need to see how we handle this. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. When I was 13 years old, and something that Stephanie didn't tell you, I grew up in Sweden. So I'm 13, I'm in Sweden, and I have to take home economics. Everyone has to take home economics. It's compulsory. And I'm given a task as a student. I'm given the task to furnish an apartment, because home economics is very much about, you know, making sure that you are independent and you can take care of yourself in the future. So I'm given the task, we can call it a project even, of furnishing an apartment. And so I'm given a sum of money, you know, monopoly money. And since this is Sweden, I'm told to buy all of my stuff at IKEA. So I get the IKEA catalog and I go through it. And I'm like, ooh, the clip-on couch, the luck table. I don't know if this makes sense to you, but this one maybe, the Billy bookcase. I had them all in there. And one thing that I didn't choose to buy for my money was a dresser, because I didn't want a dresser. I wanted to put my clothes in boxes in the closet. I thought that was much better. So I didn't pick a dresser. But I enjoyed this project. I worked on it. I handed it in, and I was really, really happy and very satisfied, motivated, engaged. Then I got it back from my teacher. I rifled through the papers to see, what did she say? What did she think? And it was not what I expected. She said it was fine, but why didn't I have a dresser? And I was like, this was my unique selling point. This is what I had done differently from everybody else, and I was punished for it. So you might ask, why am I bringing this up today when we're here at ITU? It's quite an ordinary story. Maybe some of you have been in the same situation when you were students. But I think it really highlights something, and that is the missed opportunity of the educator to really leverage my motivation and my engagement. Because what happened to me as a learner was that I stopped caring a little bit, because she told me to stay in the box. And my curiosity, my creativity was a little bit damaged, right? Not entirely, but a little bit. I mean, this is a small story. And what we want to do here at ITU is, of course, the opposite. And that's why Carla and I named this talk Active Minds, Creative Paths. We want to build meaningful learning experiences for our students. Learning experiences where they don't feel like they're put in a box because they didn't pick a dresser. So I'm going to hand over now to Carla, my colleague, and I would say the best person to explain what our project-based learning model is all about.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for the nice introduction and also for highlighting how difficult it is to create good project-based learning. So indeed, there are several challenges that we need to tackle when we want to talk about the implementation of such approach. And if it's not only a big challenge already, we added another layer on it because we said, well, we want to do project-based learning teaching approaches, but we also want to do it interdisciplinary. So we were very ambitious, as you can imagine. As a good teacher, I always bring in a definition. So I like to start by creating a common understanding of what is project-based learning. So Holgart defines it as a PBL, for short. When students work together in the project, they tackled specific real-world problems. They tackle a specific challenge, working in teams. Basically, here at ITU, we also said that we want to have very small teams to give the chance for the students to really interact, to learn from each other, and to really connect across the different disciplines. And Holgart goes further and says that throughout the projects, the students are engaging with research, they engage with problem definition, they think critically about what they do, they develop prototypes, they look for solutions, and they do present their outcomes. So here at ITU, we also assume that the students go through all these processes. One thing that we did from the very beginning was to kind of create our guiding principles. How do we want to do this in practice? And this is just a set of 6 principles that pretty much describe our teaching methodology here. First of all, you all know about the mission of ITU and how impact is important to us. And we want to address all these grand challenges that Sebastian was just talking about just before. So all projects here at ITU need to be real world relevant. So this is super important for us. The second aspect is that is collaborative learning. Students do not learn alone. They learn with each other, they learn in teams, they learn with the educators. And we even teach in teams. So we have teaching teams at ITU that bring together people from the different expertise areas to bring all this knowledge to our students because they are also interdisciplinary, which is basically our third principle. Our students are welcome from all backgrounds, which also brings a different challenges because maybe we are mixing in teams people that come from social sciences with data scientists. Maybe we have engineers, maybe we have artists. So we have to deal also with this question of how to work interdisciplinary learning and teaching. The fourth principle is about active learning. So the students at ITU cannot be just passive recipients of knowledge. They arrive, they are asked to really engage to determine how their projects look like, what are they interested in, what kind of passions do they have, and we want to bring all that together in this active learning method. So they cannot stay just sitting, listening, thinking, okay, when does this lecture end, and go home. So I'm sorry to say, students at ITU really need to engage. They are here all day, they are there learning labs. They are at their project-based homes, developing together the solutions and looking for finding really their passion across their different projects. But again, this is also important for us. The fifth guideline is that teaching is no longer what I'm doing now, which is just doing a presentation. Teaching now, it's more, educators are more mentors. They are there in the field together with the students facing problems. Sometimes they don't know the answers, right? But they are there, they are motivated to support the students. So they take a different role, which until then was basically repeating, go again, repeating, another semester, repeating. So again, here, coaching is super, super important because this is where educators really come through to support the students. And then obviously, the sixth principle, a very important one, we want to drive academic excellency. So our students also need to learn all the foundation theoretical aspects that support the students into putting into practice the projects. Okay, I just want to highlight one thing. The whole project-based learning approach is student-centered. So this means that the student is sitting in the driving seat. Is the student within reason, of course? It's not like you are coming here, the students are coming here and they can do whatever they think. But within reason, within their programs, the students do have the freedom to make choices about their learning paths. Okay, so this is super important for us. But I always say with great freedom also comes great responsibility. So our students, once again, they need to be very active. So this schema, this is just another process of how we kind of describe how things go here. And I would like to point out a couple of components that are important. So we do have a competence framework. We do have project portfolios, project catalog, and we also have the students' portfolio. So I want you to keep this in mind, and in a moment I'll try to detail these different components a bit more. But for now, let's keep an idea on how this works. So we started with the competence framework because our curricula is competence driven. Basically, what we are doing is to having a collection of different competences that then are translated in learning outcomes, which then are associated with different projects. And then the students have the liberty to come in saying, I want to take part of this project. And they know that taking part of that project means that they are going to learn this, and this. So basically, they are also collecting these learning outcomes, these learning competences, and they are creating their own portfolio. One key aspect for us is that these portfolios are in the end amalgamation of all the qualifications that the students collect, and they can present to possible employers in the future, basically showing what kind of research they are doing, what kind of projects they are doing, what kind of roles they developed during the time. And then obviously our educators are there to support the whole process. But going a little bit deeper into the competence framework, we are firm believers that future-ready education is competence and collaboration-driven. And this basically means that we are taking the competences that we assume the students we likely need for jobs that probably are not invented yet. So this is very tricky. We say that our competence framework will not ever be finished. So this is a living document that we keep track of every single report that is out there from the EU, OECD, World Economics Forum, and we also talked with stakeholders of WKO, for instance. We had workshops with partners and stakeholders from the industry of the region and Austria to really understand what kind of competences are being necessary at now, in 5 years, in 10 years from now. And what we did was to categorize these different competences in domain-specific. Oh, there's a typo there, sorry for that. Domain-specific, which is a relation to specific fields. Maybe it's neuro diversity, maybe it's about history, maybe it's about psychology. So all those competences live within the domain-specific category. Then we have everything related with technology, digital transformation. Again, another part of the competence. And we also have method-specific competences, design thinking, future thinking, design science research methodologies, and so many others. But I would like to highlight, in fact, two categories. So social and personal. So usually people refer to this as 21st century or soft skills, but we really want to make sure that these competences come across within our curriculums, because we really want our students to be able to work in teams. Therefore, they have the competence of team working. We want the students to be resilient. Then maybe that's something that we can observe in terms of a personal competence, and so forward. One question that we get a lot is, okay, so if you are doing projects, this means that I don't really have any lectures. Well, I'm sorry, that's not really the case. The true thing is that indeed we have compulsory courses, we have elective courses that allow the students to navigate through different courses as well. But I want to highlight one very creative thing that we did, which was to create the project integrated courses. So these are units of knowledge that actually exist within the projects. So what does this mean? This means that a student doing a course, a project that involves augmented reality, virtual reality, will probably attend a project integrated courses on these technologies, and they will learn how to use the technology. Okay, so these courses have a curricula. The content is specified, but the good thing is that when the students decide on a project, the teaching teams come together, they discuss what they want to highlight within these project integrated courses, and then make sure that the students get enough knowledge to support their design choices for the project. Okay. Another question that we get a lot is, where do these projects come from? So they live in the project catalog. I already told you as much, but the projects actually come from our different stakeholders. So we do have industry projects. So people from industry society can contribute with projects and challenges that we want. Academic staff can also create concrete research projects. But also our students can come up with ideas and things that they would like to see developed here. And sometimes we just saw that in the last PhD program, Computational X, there were seed projects, just challenges that our professors created, and then the students made the projects their own. They kind of drived around the different challenges and made concrete project formulations. What they need to respond to is that there needs to be space for interdisciplinary thinking all the time, and it's implied that being a technical university, we are looking for solutions that involve technology. So students are tackling these two key points of ITU. The other question So this comes into Christina's. This is assessment, continuous assessment is what we think that we need here. Because we are interested in seeing the outcome, the solution that the students find, but we want to understand how was the process of developing the project, how much a student evolved. So maybe someone that just arrived from, he's an historian, maybe does know anything about artificial intelligence. How much did he learn by doing a project? So this is important. Providing feedback all the time, both graded and ungraded assessment are in there. We also consider individual and group assessment. And here again, our mentors, our coaches are there in the field talking with the students and doing all these observation about these team dynamics that Sebastian was telling us about. Different types of assessments. I would like to point it out that most of our students will have to do public presentations of the outcomes of their projects, and they are very likely to create different types of prototypes. Just to conclude very quickly, these are just projects developed by the Founding Lab students initiative. They presented their projects last September at Ars Electronica, so maybe some of you already seen it. And I would like, all of them very interesting, but I would like to highlight the work of these two lovely ladies. So Amanda, she's an artist from Australia. Joanna, she's Austrian, and she's a data scientist. And what they did was to develop a smartwatch. They really printed it out. They connected sensors to it, and they studied muscle fatigue. And obviously, they did incorporate data analysis techniques. They created artwork with the data that they created, and they reflected on how technology can be used within this scope. I talked about a lot. Sorry for that. I'm Portuguese, by the way, so we talk a lot. I just wanted to tell you, well, I touch people, I touch spaces, I talked about the learning labs, I talked about many different aspects, but there was one key aspect that I didn't touch, and Christina will do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, as Carla said, there are many questions that we get. Where do the projects come from? How are you going to assess? Another question we also get quite often is, okay, this sounds great, but what are you going to do when you get bigger? How will you sustain this? And we are at ITU, right? So we're going to sustain it, and we're going to do it together with the team of Sebastian Dennerlein, of course, together with our wonderful professors, but also together with technology. So, intelligent technologies in education. I would like to talk a little bit about that. And ITU and our educational model is uniquely situated to actually take on the task to see what can we do in this field. How do we take intelligent technologies beyond what I would say today's quite conventional edtech technologies can give us to actually perform or do real educational innovation. And it's very exciting to know that the PhD students in digital transformation and learning are already exploring this. I'm sure you can talk to them afterwards, the ones who are here, if you want to know more about what they're doing. But this is our aim, not more of the same. I think you've heard that before from ITU, not more of the same, but something new and something different. So how do we actually contribute to educational innovation in this field? But when we do this, we always have to put learning first. You can't put the tech first. So how do we actually get to a point where we know that our students learn effectively? So pedagogy must lead the tech. But before we invent the tech, or before we also adapt and adopt technology that already exists. There are three things that I would say learning science has agreed on is very important. And we can see these three areas also reflected in the educational model here at ITU. One important aspect, of course, is motivation, practice, and transferability. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. So we have to make sure that we design for motivation, to drive engagement and readiness to learn. And motivation thrives when learners feel competent, connected, and autonomous. I'm in charge. It also increases when they can see success and the value in learning. And when they can see that, ooh, there's this gap in my knowledge. There's something here that I don't know, and I want to know more. So we need to harness these qualities when we think about how to develop learning technologies. And designing for practice, what does this mean? Well, it's through practice that we actually retain the knowledge that we have. I mean, I know this myself. If I do something once and then I don't do it again for 8 months, I have to redo that first sort of practice. But if I continue and I learn over time, I can retain the knowledge. So here at ITU, we can actually give our students effortful, varied practice that strengthens long-term retention. But expertise is also built with the learner through structured, feedback-driven skill development. And as Carla explained, the whole educational model is supported in this way, both by the teaching teams, by the people that work here at ITU as lab experts, lecturers, professors, coaches. So this is what we have to think about. And then learning. It's enhanced when it's scaffolded, it is modeled, and when you gradually transition into being able to do it on your own. When you no longer need, the lab expert, I no longer need Nelson by my side to actually be able to use that equipment. I can do it on my own. This is the type of practice we're talking about. And this is also something we have to keep in mind when developing intelligent technologies. And then design for interdisciplinarity or transferability, as I called it before, being able to take your knowledge out of this safe little space where I learned it into another new space, a different type of context, a real world context is what we're aiming for. So the ability to transfer learning, to have that learning pathway, it relies on that authentic type of assessment that Carla also mentioned, that you get formative feedback. You know, okay, this is what I'm doing and this is what I need to do differently to actually get where I want to go. And we also want exposure to varied examples. It strengthens my ability to problem solve. So all of these three things is something that we, of course, keep in mind when we do our analog teaching, so to say. But when we go into the realm of creating and innovating intelligent learning technologies, this also has to be kept in mind because we want to put learning first. And that is what we want to do at ITU. We want to move beyond convention. We want to move beyond the off-the-shelf products that give us only technological sophistication, but we also want to do educational innovation. And we have a unique opportunity here because we do have the building blocks, a clear theory of active learning, our project-based learning model, our interdisciplinary project-based learning model. We have support to scaffold learning, and we also have continuous improvement cycles that drives improvement over time. And, which I don't have up on the slide here, we have a great collaboration with Professor Dennerlein's research group It's still nascent, it's in the beginning, but that research that his research group conducts will, of course, inform what we do in learning and vice versa. So that is a very, very important aspect of this whole development. And with those words, Carla, please, you come up here. We'd like to conclude and say thank you for listening. And yes, we're happy to take any questions you might have.
Oh, thank you. Are there questions, or there are probably hundreds of questions? So you did such a good job that everybody is now flabbergasted. Sebastian, come back up. So I think for Sebastian, we had a question there before. You still remember your question?
I can ask any of you this question. Is there a role of a facilitator in ITU to work with the groups?
Yes.
Should I? Yeah, you can.
Yes, indeed. So we do have the role of a coach. So this is someone that joins the group at certain moments during work group, and they do facilitate, observe, and help the students with the group dynamics, which I guess that's what you are asking. On top of it, you also have the mentors of the projects, the project owners, we call it sometimes, which are the professors, the educators that own the projects and guide the students through the expert knowledge that they need. And to add something?
No, I don't think he needs.
Oh my.
The lab experts are there as well. So I think it's not only one type of coach that is basically supporting the students, but a full cohort, taking different perspectives on the coaching process and supporting the students this way.
Yeah.
So, are there specific dynamics that you have already worked with this coach and that they have worked really well?
A specific dynamic, could you?
Maybe I haven't fully understand the role of the coach. Is the coach just supervising the process, or is he also offering dynamics for the groups to?
Oh, yeah, the coach, I can start, and then Carla can also answer. The coach is there to support the project groups, especially in the two competence domains, social skills and personal skills, and to work with the group to develop, for example, their collaborative skills, communication skills, teamwork skills. The coach is not there, it's there to support and also evaluate how things are going.
I think that's exactly that. I can perhaps add one example. So it was not the case so far, but let's say that in one of the teams there's some kind of conflict. So if a conflict arises, we advise the teams and we give the tools to the teams to deal with this conflict themselves. But maybe at some point, the coach also is able to identify that something is not going the right way. So the coach can also mediate this conflict management, for instance. But this is just one example. In the first session, the coach can come and help the students to create the collaboration contract, which is basically a document where the students working in a team establish their rules of engagement from day one. So they decide how to communicate. They decide what are the tasks, what are the roles. So all these, the coach, the person of the coach can mediate.
Yes, and maybe to add to that, just a small additional note, depending on what the team is designing, it may also include different design methods that the coach can apply. So if it's, for example, in the domain of educational science, it could be educational design research as a methodology that guides the design process. Or when it's just about time or project management, then it could be different methodologies as well. It could be agile development practices that are taken up to help the teams to structure their weekly work. So I think that really depends on the project, what then methodology the coach can draw upon.
There's a question there.
Carol, I think you mentioned this project portfolio. I'm not sure if I got it right, but I'm really curious about, how this portfolio is formed. You briefly mentioned that some cases come from the industry, some can come, from the students or the professors. I guess what I'm interested in is, are these real problems, real, like cases? And if then, for example, if a technological solution or an innovation is, comes up as a result of this project, is there a potential for it to then be mass-produced, amplified, or?
That there's always the potential. Actually, we want to impact society. We want to bring whatever we learn here to the outside. So I guess that's a dream, right? So if one of our students can actually find a solution to, I don't know, climate change, well, why not? We need to make sure that whatever we find here needs to be on the research side, obviously disseminated, but also on concrete projects, also exposed to the outside.
Maybe we have two levels of projects. So within the first, when we talk about masters, so the first year of the master's program, the projects will be much more technology oriented, because the goal first is to really learn the technologies, the digital technologies in our learning labs. Of course, always with a purpose. So there's always this motivational part coming in, but these projects will be more, let's say, self-contained, more default kind of project. In the second year, we really are looking, and we are already collecting challenges from the real world, from industry, society, the city, academia, from the students themselves, in order to design learning projects, which then also run a much longer time. In the first year will be shorter. In the second year will be longer projects, which can then also lead to the master's thesis. There were another question.
Because I was wondering how you sort of set the boundaries of those projects, because depending on the project sponsors, I can imagine that industry or companies have great ideas of all the problems they want you to solve, whereas students might be very different in terms of making those problems way too big, what they could potentially ever solve or work with, or then maybe there are also a couple of exceptions of students who sort of say, I just want to do this very, very small part, and ends up not to be comparable, or they get lost, or other students feel, I don't know, no, this group is not doing any work where I'm spending 4 weeks with it.
Yeah.
So how do you set boundaries to the sponsors, to the students? How do you help them define it?
Yeah, we didn't really talk about here today was how does a project become a project at ITU? There is a model that we have devised where suggestions can come in from industry, from our researchers, from our students, and then they go to, I think we have called it a project committee, where these project ideas are assessed. And of course, when they are submitted, they have to follow a certain format. So there you have the first boundary, right? And then the assessment in the project committee, that's the second boundary. But then the idea is that the students, and I think we're talking mainly the master students here in the second year, they will get to look in this project catalog at the ready assessed projects, and then rank to say, this one is one that I would like to work on, or this one is one I would like to work on. And then that's how the groups are formed around the projects. Of course, especially industry projects, what we are looking for there, for example, is not them saying, ooh, we want to develop an app, because that we want something more challenging and more innovative than developing an app. They can probably do that themselves, perhaps with a consultant. We want our students to be more challenged and to have a different type of experience. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I just wanted to say that all of these, I mean, we have good ideas, but there are also challenges out there which are just not yet solved. So we can develop and we will develop, I think, a good guidance of how we will take these projects on board, coordinated with the professors, for example, see how to make a first challenge on board that can be tackled by the students at all, and then they get the support to go through these projects. But what we also want to understand, what means actually interdisciplinarity for these projects? So that goes beyond simply throwing together a group of students, right? So we need to understand what competences they have, what competences they want to evolve, and then what kind of interdisciplinary interactions then actually emerge as part of this group work. So this screening that we want to set up, that's then also something where we can learn of how to better design the projects over the time and cater it so that the students can learn, can produce the innovations, and at the same time result in research innovations that are interesting for our research that we do here, but also outside for the companies that we work with. So we have some ideas, but that is also something that we will learn of.
So those learning projects also have to serve a goal of that people really reach specific learning goals, right? Like what Carla said, the learning outcomes. So if we say there's a project in year 1, it has to fulfill certain goals. You have to be able to learn programming, you have to do, I don't know, an augmented reality environment and stuff like that, right? So that also gives boundaries, of course.
I would love to thank you for pushing an innovative boundary for students, because I think oftentimes, at least for my students, I feel like post-pandemic, a lot of them are really relegating back to this space of wanting more traditional assessments, which is very sad for those of us that want to be innovative in this space. I'm curious as to, you probably have a very self-selecting group of students that really want this type of education, but do you anticipate reluctance at all from students that maybe would probably favor more traditional methods, and for the simplicity and the kind of boundary setting that they can have, that we're not asking them to do as much as we might in PBL?
Well, I say yes, is our short answer. But yes, I think, and I'll be happy to hand over to Carla and Sebastian, but we see the students we have so far, and we are not actively interviewing our incoming master students, but I've spoken to those who are interviewing them. Some of them, they know everything about us. They want to come here just because we do things differently, that we have project-based learning. That's why they want to come here. Also because of the specializations we offer, I should say. So, but then there are other students who are like, yeah, I was looking for university in Austria, and I found you, and you seem interesting. So of course we will have that whole range of students, and we will have to, I think one thing that we will definitely have to do is prepare them so they understand before they come here, but also very early on, what this means. Because yes, not everybody is going to be interested in learning in this way, because it is, of course, it requires on part of you as a student to really engage. I know I was at one student fair and I spoke to some an interested group of young people. And then when they heard about our model, they said, okay, thank you.
Thank you, but no.
Yeah.
Well, I can't agree more, but I would just add that the first thing that we do with our students is to organize a welcome week. So when they arrive, they are really brought together into the community that is already established here. And I guess that's a feeling that we want them to have from the start, that if there is some, I don't know, uncomfortable feeling of having to talk in, do a public presentation, or if this brings you uncomfort, we need to address these kind of things. And starting from day one, we kind of explain what we mean by project-based learning, what does it entails, Working as a team, it seems that is also something that is not very good for students because they do tend to monitor what they do and I rely on me and just me, but that's not life, right? We all know that in professional environments, we have to talk in teams. And we all know that to solve problems, we cannot do it alone. So I kind of think and I hope that we can reason with those students that there's a better way.
And it will be an up and down. So from our own lives, professional lives, we know when we work with colleagues, and that does not even need to be interdisciplinary, then this will be painful at times. So you will need to learn how to collaborate, with whom you can work in with which ways, which are methods to overcome challenges. And that is something which will have ups and downs. And that's why we have the coaches on board. And that's why we try to support the students. But it will be a challenge where they learn more. That is at least our ambition that we strive for, but it will not always be eating cake, right? But I think that's part of the game. And that's what we want to live ourselves here and throw us in, full ambition. And that is what we also expect from the students that come here, that they choose it wisely. Yeah.
We speak if Stephanie can.
Take care of us, I guess.
But actually, the growth we've seen of people in our summer schools in the founding lab was astounding. I mean, like what you said with Amanda and Johanna, they were so totally different two people and who learned from each other so much. I don't think any other environment would have made that possible. Yeah, to make out of an introvert somebody who suddenly does a podcast. I was really flabbergasted, and so this is what we are aiming for, and also to address people who, in their first choice, did not choose necessarily technology. Yeah, but to say, I want to do something else, and then through another way of realizing, oh, but with these technologies, I can actually do a lot of difference in my own discipline to target them and to get them engaged. Any more questions? Otherwise, well, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for our online audience. There's some something to nibble on and some drinks. Please help yourself and let's have a nice talks and mingling. Thank you. Wir machen noch ein bisschen.